and Bishop Hood, portrayed by Michael Connor, will debate the question, should this Confederate monument be taken down? We know the answer, but let's hear the debate.
First, let me just set a little background. On August 4th, 1910, Judge Armistead Burwell, Confederate Army veteran and NC Supreme Court Associate Justice, gave the keynote speech at the dedication of that Confederate monument. He is here in spirit this evening to keep what he set in motion on that day in 1910. Opposing him is Bishop James Walker, an abolitionist who served as a chaplain for the Union Army during the Civil War. He was born a free man of color in Pennsylvania in 1831. Let's hear his piece.
I am Bishop Hood, an abolitionist. I believe that this monument should be taken down because it misrepresents history. It glorifies people who perpetuated slavery and attempted secession from the United States and lost the Civil War. When 11 southern states seceded from the Union in 1861, they were very clear that the reason was the impending abolition of slavery.
I am Judge Burwell, and I served in the Civil War. I believe this monument represents our country's history, no matter how complicated. Taking it down would essentially censor, whitewash, and potentially erase that history. I believe citizens of the United States have a right to hold controversial opinions and build monuments to honor their beliefs.
Look, Judge Burwell, after the Confederate States lost the Civil War, the South revised history. The states declared that they had not been fighting to preserve slavery, and instead, according to David W. Blank, American history professor at Yale University, fashioned a set of ideas and arguments that they were fighting to hold back the massive industrialization of America. The lost cause mythology was used to continue the idea that black people needed to be subjugated for their own good as a justification for the Jim Crow laws. Now, erecting the monuments to the lost heroes of the lost cause was part of the campaign to revive history.
Wait just a minute. The history of the United States is a multi-layered, complicated, and ever-evolving. Those who disagree with the beliefs upheld by the monuments should work to understand the history these monuments represent, rather than trying to simply remove them and the history from sight. John Daniel Davidson, political editor at The Federalist, explained that they were wrong about slavery does not excuse us today from the burden of trying to understand what motivated them to fight and what motivated them and their families to undertake a flurry of monument building decades later as the surviving veterans began to die off. A more mature society would recognize that the past is always with you and must always be kept in mind. Each Confederate monument is a reminder not only of the Civil War and the end of slavery, but the assertion of the federal government's dominance over states' rights, as well as the persistence of systemic racism.
Well, Glenn Foster, founder of the Freedom Neighborhood, stated of the Emancipation Monument Memorial, which depicts Lincoln over a kneeling freed slave. This is what he said. Judge Burwell, when I look at that statue, I'm reminded my freedom and my liberation is only dictated by white people's terms. We're trying to let the government know we're not going to wait any longer and present this institutionalizing of our freedom. This particular Confederate statue that you have here is a painful reminder of past and present institutionalized racism in the United States. Now, Dr. Henry Louis Gates is right when he says we can't get to learning from our history if we keep accepting that racism should be celebrated in American history. This monument was built to honor and enforce white supremacist ideas and views, and the intent of damaging effect has not been erased by time.
Yes. Bishop Hood, removing a monument is a slippery slope that could lead to the brash removal of monuments to any slightly problematic person. Think about it. Washington, Jefferson, and Grant had undeniable ties to slavery. Washington owned over 300 slaves, Jefferson over 600, and Grant worked on a wife's family plantation and inherited one slave upon his father-in-law's death. Should we not honor the contributions of Washington, Jefferson, and Grant to the United States because they owned slaves? As did many men of their standing at the time, even though they struggled with the institution. Some jurisdictions have chosen to put explanatory plaques beside the Confederate monuments to teach a more complete history of slavery in the Civil War, but also the white segregationist history that promoted the building of such a monument to promote revisionist lost cause history. We must preserve this for generations to come.
Judge Burwell, the monument still appeals to white supremacists, as demonstrated by the 2017 rally to defend Lee and Jackson monuments. Now, you said in your speech on this day in 1910 that the Confederate monument is represented as a defender of slavery. Monuments are ultimately about which values we want to honor and put on public display. Monuments to men who advocated cruelty and barbarism to achieve such a plainly racist end are grotesque affront to these ideas. Now, there are many other people who could be represented by the statues, who could better represent the historical progress and diversity of this country and this community. Now, this Confederate monument pays homage to hate, not heritage. We must take it down. Remember the Kenya proverb, treat the world well. It was not given to you by your parents. It was lent to you by your children. Judge Burwell, you have not served the future generations well.
Bishop Hood, I thank you very much for your time.
I thank you for yours.
Judge Burwell died 3 years later after giving that speech in Cornelius. He is buried in the Elwood Cemetery among other Confederate soldiers, which is in Mecklenburg County. Perhaps that would be a better place for that Confederate monument to go. Monuments pose little educational relevance